Hello and welcome to the session. We'll talk about Karnad's views on theatre, and we'll also talk about a couple of criticisms of Karnad's theatre and his practice, and we also will look at some of the critical viewpoints on Nagamandala. Karnad says about folk theatre, he says that the energy of a folk theatre comes from the fact that although it seems to uphold traditional values, it also has the means of questioning these values, of making them literally stand on their head. So this idea, the idea that there is an enforcement, there's a reiteration of traditional values as well as a questioning of them, takes place in Nagamandala. We have Rani here and there questioning Naga for not informing her about the circumstances which bind them, so that traditional idea that the husband must not be questioned is questioned by Rani here and there. And we also see, as readers and viewers of this theatre, this piece of theatre, we also see that double standards are at play. Double standards very clearly in the case of Appana, who gets away with adultery, right? So internally within the play there is a kind of rebellion, momentary rebellion here and there, and externally from the audience we question the hypocrisy. So traditional values are being questioned. Secondly, Karnad here states that certain of these values are turned on their head, right? And this pertains to the second conclusion that we have in Nagamandala, where we have a threesome, right? Rani, Appana and Naga in that domestic household. So the traditional heterosexual unit is questioned there. That's inevitable, we recognize that. But there's no way Rani is able to really question or get out of the clutches of male hegemony. That's she can't do. She can't get out of that. So we have two men exercising power over her. One is Naga and the other is Appana, and Rani has no way of saying no or getting out of their influence and hegemony. So that is always there. Next one. Karnad on folk theatre again, he says the various conventions, the chorus, the masks, the seemingly unrelated comic episodes, the mixing of human and non-human worlds, permit the simultaneous presentation of alternative points of view, of alternative attitudes to the central problem. So all these are present in Nagamandala. We have the story which acts as the chorus. We have the presence of flames who kind of offer several anecdotes and who also act as audience, commenting on the action. And then we have a mixing of the human and the non-human worlds in the figure of Naga, who can take on a human form. So the animal and the human world collapse into one another. And what Karnad says is that these various forms offer multiple plural points of view on the same subject, on the same feminine subject. And the question is, to us, is the perspective multiple? Is the perspective multiple? Do we have differing viewpoints, alternative attitudes offered about life through these various forms, the chorus, the flames, the story, the song, the playwright, and so on and so forth. So I want you to kind of think about the answer to that question very, very deeply. Or do we have the same approach to life, the same approach to the life of a woman presented in different ways, the same approach being offered in different forms. So I want you to test this theory of Karnad against Nagamandala. Now, here we have a criticism on Karnad's plays by B.M. Balla. It's Balla's review of Taran Mukherjee's book on Karnad's plays, performance and critical perspectives. The critic says, the plays are directed to the post-colonial search for Indian roots. Most of his themes are mythological or historical, and he has progressively shown that ancient Indian myths can be harnessed to address the modern sensibility of loss of individual identity. Okay, it's a very interesting quote. Let's take this slowly. The first point is that Karnad's plays are, part of a search for Indian roots. Right? So there is a movement towards indigenous culture, indigenous ways of looking at the problems in society and trying to figure out an indigenous solution to the problems faced by an individual, right? So therefore, Karnad's plays are mythological or historical, right? And the critic also says that Indian myths can be exploited, harnessed, used, utilized. Right? Indian myths can be utilized, can be used as instruments to address the modern sensibility of loss of individual identity. So the point is, the modern sensibility, the modern condition is that we have lost our individual identity, right? If you apply this to Nagamandala, we can see that Rani doesn't have an individual identity at all. She is a lover to Naga, she is a wife to Aparna. What is she herself? We don't know. There's a vacuum. There's a massive lacuna there. At one point in the play, she says, I was a child when you married me. I'm now a wife. I'm going to be a mother. So look at the various roles that she's pointing to in relation to her attempt at defining herself. She can only define herself in relation to all these positions, functions towards somebody else, child to her parents, wife to her husband, mother to her child, and so on, right? And which is why the disability of Kurdava very, very literally tells us the independence of the female, the lack of independence of the female, and the dependence of the female on the husband or on the male heir. Right? So that disability is very, very symbolic as well as literal, which is why Kurdava's character is very important in this play. So going back to the point about mythology being used to address the modern sensibility of loss of identity seems to work to a certain extent in Nagamandala. Karnad very beautifully, effectively, captivatingly uses myth to talk about the loss of individuality of Rani, and we as enlightened readers perceive the function of myth, to what extent myth is successful in portraying that loss, but we also as enlightened readers realize that the myth comes short, right? And we also realize that the ending, even the second ending, the alternate ending is dissatisfactory. Is dissatisfactory. Why is it dissatisfactory? The only liberation that Rani gets in this play is sexual liberation, right? The only way that she can assert herself, is by becoming a goddess, not by becoming an individual of her own with functions of her own towards the rest of the society. She still continues to be contented with a good husband, a child, right? Not other things don't matter. Other things she's not even aware of, right? Go. Balla, the critic, goes on to say that Karnad understood more fully the politics of his aesthetic choices He understood the politics of his aesthetic choices and mastered the art of subversion of the well-established and endless deconstruction of the hierarchies with remarkable irreverence by complex manipulation, the meaning in order to perform a subsequent act of reinterpretation. So let me pick out the interesting words there. Deconstruction, irreverence, manipulation, and reinterpretation. So this would really beautifully sum up the entire play. So what Karnad is doing here is that he's subverting the sexual authority of the husband by introducing this insidious, crafty, clever, charming Naga into the world. So therein lies the subversion, right? The husband's autonomy is shattered there. The husband doesn't have the sole influence, authority there. The power to offer love is not limited to the husband. So there is subversion there. The hierarchy of the husband is broken up there. So we have a reinterpretation of the role of love offered by the husband. So that reinterpretation is ongoing. So we have a complex manipulation, obviously, here in the way Rani kind of accommodates Naga, her first lover, into her wedded bliss with Aparna. So there's craftiness there, manipulation there, the hierarchies are collapsed. So in that way, we do have a reinterpretation, right? But once again, we need to remember, what about the individual identity of the female, the feminine, which is kind of caught in this network of manipulation and reinterpretation? How far does she get a fulfilled individual life in this society? Her sexual liberation doesn't seem to, let her get out of the house. And at one point, Naga says, I haven't seen her, right? She doesn't seem to know what's going on in the outer society. And if you remember the trial scene, the elders say, don't you know that Kurdava has run mad? She doesn't know what's going on in the outside world. So it's very interesting that her liberation, her freedom, her satisfaction, her contentment seems to end within the bedroom. And that seems to be the reality for her. Next one. Okay, here we have a very interesting set of ideas from Rashad Khan. It's a review of Nagamandala. It's easily available online. Just Google search review of Nagamandala by Rashad Khan. You will get the entire article. It's free access. And Rashad Khan here says that Karnad, through the play, exposes the exploitation and incarceration of women that occurs through the institution of marriage, and how myths display the fears of men in society and are thus inherently patriarchal and are used in order to control and restrict the actions of women. The play also mocks the idea of chastity and aims at the emancipation and empowerment of women. So it's pretty clear and neatly laid out, the problematics of the institution of marriage, which incarcerates women, and the critic also very clearly points out that the myths here, as utilized and as represented by Karnad, tell us that they are patriarchal, and the myths are used in order to control and restrict the mobility of women, the individuality of women, and clearly the play mocks. That's what is very interesting about Nagamandala, and something that we can really notice and appreciate is the fact that the idea of chastity is kind of shattered by this alternative ending offered by Karnad, right? She's not limited to a particular kind of chastity that is dictated by the institution of marriage. And the critic says that the play aims at the emancipation and empowerment of men, but we don't really see it. It's a very, as I said, a very limited kind of liberty that Rani gets in being, accommodative of Naga, right? So, it's a limited, liberation that Rani is offered through this mythological, through this folklore play. there's a wonderful, as I already showed you, there's a wonderful adaptation of Nagamandala, a Kannada movie, which I would highly recommend for viewing. Thank you for watching.